I would also say that if the president really is intent on stopping them, and certainly he has said he is. I mean, the president said very clearly in the speech at AIPAC that the United States would prevent Iran from going nuclear, that it was prepared to use the military to do that, but it would prefer to use sanctions. Well, if he's really serious about using sanctions, then for God's sakes, get serious. Because the real truth is the vast majority of all the crippling sanctions were generated by Congress, usually with an enormous amount of resistance from the White House. There are still lots of other sanctions, particularly central bank sanctions and insurance sanctions, that could be implemented unilaterally by the United States that would be very, very painful. I'm personally extremely skeptical that sanctions are going to have an effect. I think Khamenei is quite prepared to see Iran take a great deal of punishment but continue with the nuclear program. I think he's got a game plan here, and then more or less the president plays along with that game plan. They're just going to continue to increase the number of centrifuges operating, enriching to 20%, so you're going to drop the breakout deadline. You're going to go, David Albright, who's a very thoughtful man, believes the Iranian nuclear breakout capacity is now between 2 and 4 months. What the Iranians are going to do is they're going to drop that down to 30 days, keep dropping it down. The Americans have already shown that they're unprepared to strike at a 20% enrichment rate, which is about 70% of the way to getting a bomb. And they're not going to go there. There is no red line on enrichment. So if the Israelis don't strike, the Iranians are going to play that out, and all we have is sanctions. So if you really do believe sanctions are the way, then God's sakes, you better be very serious about that very quickly. I would also add that if you think that sanctions are the way to go, it also would behoove the administration to actually use some type of red line. I mean, if the Iranians, when they look at us, they don't see that we are, in fact, the Iranian commentary goes the other way. The only time it's amusing, the Iranians used to ignore the Israelis a great deal in their commentary. That's actually reversing a bit. The Iranians are beginning to take the Israelis more seriously. They're not taking the Americans more seriously, at least on the issue of the military option. I think on the notion of sanctions, we have caught their attention. But the regime still, I think, is quite determined to move forward, and we'll see if they want to have any discussions with the United States on this issue, any serious discussions. I'm willing to bet fairly large quantities of money that Larry is wrong. So I would end this by simply stating that I don't think the administration has handled the Middle East terribly well. I think the president in particular came into office extremely naive about the Middle East, which is why he engaged in his engagement strategy with Bashar al-Assad. He engaged in his letters and correspondence with Khamenei. I'm not opposed to those, by the way. I'm sure John Limpert wrote some beautiful letters in Persian to Khamenei, and I'd love to see them become public. But his notion of what the Islamic world was, the problems of the Islamic world and America's problems there primarily dealt with George Bush, with American aggressiveness and American hegemony, I think are fundamentally wrong. I think they have been proven wrong. But I don't know whether the president has learned over the last 4 years that the United States actually should not lead from behind. That there are times in the Middle East, and this is one of those times, where the United States needs to be there. It doesn't necessarily need to be there militarily, though it must be prepared to be there. But it needs to serve, I think, a fundamental role that's been very healthy in Iran, and that is to be a bully pulpit, to be a critic. And I don't think the administration has actually taken on that role. I think it's uncomfortable of doing that. It's uncomfortable with having the United States seem as an imperialist country. And so it won't use its voice effectively to critique what is going on and to encourage the more healthy forces in the region. And with that, I'll stop.
Well, I think you can see now we deliberately chose a panel designed to present all sides and to get you awake at this hour. And I will only say, since it's not my role here today, I'll save my own personal rebuttals for the next time we sit with a glass of scotch somewhere. But I want to say one thing very briefly, because it's too good an anecdote to pass up with regards to Egypt and the events of 2011 February, and all of the talk about who knew and how did they know and when did they know. And I just want to mention, and I'll probably go to some kind of WikiLeaks jail for this, but I'll be in good company, that in 2005, President George W. Bush sat with Hosni Mubarak at Crawford Ranch, and he said, Hosni, you're a great friend of the United States. You're a real pillar for us of stability in the Middle East, but I got to talk to you about something. And this is something that W. felt very strongly about. And he said, you're doing a great job, or you're doing good work on the economy, but you've got some other work to do with your people. They're restless. You need to lift the emergency law. You need to think about some constitutional reforms, and you've got to seriously consider announcing your successor, because people are restless and this is going to cause you trouble down the road. And I have this from two different sources who were there from both sides. President Mubarak put his hand on George Bush's arm and said, thank you, George, but you don't know the Egyptian people. Well, somebody didn't know the Egyptian people. Anyway, I just want to say now, I want to invite our I think you've all found a lot of thought has gone into these presentations. If I could ask our panelists to very briefly, before we open it up for a few questions, really given the constraints at home, domestically, our economic constraints, the history, the breadth of problems and challenges we face in the Middle East, what's just happened in Benghazi, the fact that we're operating in places that are not less safe than ever in some ways for our folks, but also with our military component, the drones that you've alluded to, all the ways that we're conducting our foreign affairs, our foreign policy. If I could ask each one of you just to give me what you think the priority must be for the administration coming into these next 4 years. What should that priority be from your perspective in the Middle East? And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Larry, do you want to start? You want to come up or stay here? Okay, this working? Yeah, I think what you need to do is to work with the international community to help the people in that region fulfill their destiny. One of the reasons we're safer is that the al-Qaeda narrative was that we were supporting people like Mubarak, and the fact that he's gone, I think, makes us safer. So what we need to do is to continue to help those people make the choices that will help them, and do a cost-benefit analysis, which we never did before going into Iraq, about the costs and benefits of using military force. Let me conclude with this. I was listening to Reuel, talk here. In 2009, General Odinero asked a group of us to go to Iraq to help with the transition from the military to the State Department. And my daughter said, can you buy something for your grandson? I said, God knows, the last thing I want to do is go shopping over there. But so anyway, when I was over there, and I bought a polo shirt and said Baghdad 2009. I got home and I opened it up and it said it was made in Vietnam. You could have given that speech here when we left Vietnam and said, oh my goodness, and listen to the French. They tried to get us to go in Dien Bien Phu, and Eisenhower wouldn't do it, okay? And then we got carried away in the 60s. So this idea that somehow or another you can, and listening to Reuel here, I thought about that woman I mentioned in the beginning who heard about, the burial there. Yes, anything could happen. But as far as I see it, we're moving in the right direction. The president has a balanced policy between hard and soft power and working with the international community. And that's the way to go, because it's not just us that's affected, it's the international community.
I have two thoughts. One is I really do think we have some work to do at home to build a stronger consensus with the Congress that continued U.S. engagement is in our vital interest. I worry a lot that the Benghazi incident is going to lead to a chilling and a rolling back of the kind of presence we can have in the region, and I don't want to see the diplomats and aid workers and others to be handicapped by excessive new security rules and requirements that only create more barriers between us and the Arab world. So first, it's build consensus at home for some engagement in the region. The second is we've been doing some work at Stimson on the lessons of the Marshall Plan and what are the big ideas of the Marshall Plan that might be relevant to today's Middle East. And one wish I have that would be a more innovative, it would not be to mimic the Marshall Plan, but to be more innovative, is can we not marry up the resources that are available in the Gulf, but still accept and embrace the idea that the United States is uniquely capable when it comes to leadership, organization, some of the talents that are the United States. It's not just about money. And if there were some partnership with the people in the Gulf region that are interested in making strategic investments in stability in the Arab world, so I would love to see a new concept of partnership to marry up resources with American leadership and ideas.
Thank you very much. These are my personal views. I wish to emphasize that point. Three quick ideas. First of all, I think that obviously the Arab world is at a crucial point, particularly those countries that have pushed ahead on the democracy front. And the question of constitutional reform and getting these constitutions set and in place, I think, is absolutely vital, particularly in Tunisia and Egypt. I do not think we would argue that either Ghanouchi or Morsi are anti-American, but they face real pressure from radical Islamists, and they are trying to sort of play this game whereby they maintain their credibility with various camps. I think we have to encourage both leaders to continue to try to maintain an inclusive approach and to settle this issue of constitutionalism and move it forward as quickly as possible. I think that will create a much more important political framework for securing the democratic process. Number two, or 2 and 3, I think we have to address, as I said before, regional threats that, if they get out of hand, are really going to undermine the push for democracy in the Arab world. I do think on Iran, we have to sort of eventually move from tactics to strategy. My own sense is that the United States has used and depended on sanctions as an alternative to a strategy. Sanctions are largely tactical, and we have to decide whether we want to fight or we want to negotiate. And if we want to negotiate, we have to be prepared to put real incentives on the table and accept a deal that perhaps some actors in the region will not be happy with. But we haven't really made that choice. And I don't think increasing the severity of sanctions will help us make that choice. Because, again, it'll simply be relying on tactics. We have to decide what the strategy is. My own sense is, having worked on this issue for some time, that this has been a challenge for this administration and, I might say, the previous administration. And finally, on the Arab-Israeli issue, Tom Friedman the other day had a piece, and he said, well, the Obama should simply say we're busy, we can't answer your phone. I think maybe that's understandable sentiment for now, and it may last a little while, and tactically perhaps that's a wise way to go. But eventually this thing is going to come back and bite us, and I'm very concerned about what's going on in the Sinai and how that will affect Egypt's relations with Israel. Things have cooled down now, but it's going to come back. We have to address that issue and find some way to re-engage the Arab-Israeli conflict in ways that will make sure that this thing doesn't blow up in ways that undermine democratic peacemaking.